Hello everyone, this is Alex, and today we're talking about orchestral resonance. So I'll show you an example on how to talk about this by taking a simple piano reduction like this and taking it into something like this. So orchestral resonance, let's start by defining what is resonance. So the resonance is when you emit sound in a room and then the room acts as a resonating body. This means that the sound is traveling through the room and resonating, bouncing against the walls and coming back to your ears with something different, something filtered. And idea is interesting for us orchestrator because we have the sound, the actual sound, and the comeback from the room. And this idea that you have two things, but that starts with the same material, the same sound emitter, is super cool, right? So can we create this in orchestration? Well, you're in luck because in the orchestra you have so many instruments, so you can have them play different roles in this idea of resonance. One can play the impact, one can play the resonance. And another instrument can even add in some disturbance in there because the sound bouncing against walls create this kind of disturbance in the air. So I like to approach this orchestral style by really recreating these different elements and creating this very 3D imagery of the orchestra. And I can see that my mind really works in a very kind of mixing and electroacoustic and very electronic influence. So certainly I come into this working with the guitars and working with electronics and mixing, but people have been doing this for hundreds of years. Like if you watch the repertoire, there's tons of examples like Ravel, Debussy, who are doing these things, but they weren't necessarily as theoretically aware of the psychoacoustics of the sound, the acoustics of the sound. They were really doing it to create interesting sounds and an orchestration with depth. Now, before we get into the video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy the content. Ask me questions in the comment below. I'll be super happy to answer. And make sure you consider joining as a member. I give access to all my members to all of the scores that I present in my videos. Now, let's get into this video about orchestral resonance. Okay, so for the example today, we're starting off with something very simple. This is actually a piano reduction, but it's actually a harp. You will hear a harp. And the harp is important here because it's a very percussive instrument that punctuates every note, and there's a very fast decay. So that's where the resonance aspect will be important, because we will use the orchestra and instruments from the orchestra, groups of instruments from the orchestra, to give this sound a certain resonance. And you'll see how I approach this through these different steps. But to begin with, let's just have a listen first, and then we can discuss it. So it's really like the beginning of something. There's a sense of like melody into this, but not so much. It's more of a chord thing, a chord progression. So we hint A major chord for this here with the A root and the fifth on the E. And then we go onto this G sharp and B, which can introduce something of ninth chord, 7/9 chord. But the fact that we have the E afterwards make us more feel like we're onto E major chord. And then onto here, when we introduce the C sharp, that's something new. We feel like we're onto maybe something more of a D sharp minor. And resoluting back onto the E major chord with the B at the root. So it's more on the harmonic side, I would say, maybe with something of a gestural effect to it. And why I choose something that's doing something like an arpeggio here is because the idea of orchestral resonance is interesting when you have a music like this that introduce different register, like from the low to the high. So you can start implementing and really bringing in the colors of the orchestra afterwards into the resonance. So I'll show you how I approach this on the first step. So At first, the first thing I always do is do a string reduction. So for this, I really wanted to only have what is actually written in the music. I didn't want to add any kind of resonance. And I'm talking about this as I'm referring to this as the attack. So that's the attack of my notes, the where the note actually come in the music. And the idea with the resonance is that these notes can eventually last longer than they are actually here and that they are presented in the score. Like the low A at first could last the whole bar, right? And that's if you decide to give it a resonance. And you can do that with the orchestra by having one instrument do the attack and eventually adding another instrument, maybe in the woodwinds or maybe even in the strings, maybe have the double bass hold the low A, while this one is moving away from it and introducing new notes. And you can eventually do that with every instrument. But for now, just here, I just wanted to show you how to first get into the orchestra and just giving this very basic orchestration of more of like a literal translation of what we had from the harp. So let's listen to this first and then we can keep going. And I think it's important to do that because once you have this set, you understand the music on a whole nother level. Because what you have here is just one musician. What you have here is a whole group of instruments. And if you can fit at least your music in this string orchestra, then you got a good understanding of it and where are the good moments to bring in the soprano line, which is the first violin, the alto line, which is the second violin, the tenor line, which is the alto. We could argue that also the cello is a tenor or a low tenor, or like a baritone or something, and then the double bass would be the bass. So for now, I don't even have a bass. So that's something I'm going to keep for the next example to show that we can eventually develop on this side. We don't necessarily have to stick to the register we have from the original. We can eventually add higher register and lower register, but you need to do this carefully and mindfully. So for going forward, I copy pasted this onto my third version at first, and then got away from it. So I had these lines, and I decided to send them actually. Instead, I think I instantly copy pasted it to my woodwinds, and I found ways to add them. So I think my bassoon here was doing my cello line, my bass clarinet doing something like this. So we get into this afterwards, and then my alto line with the second viola is now done by the clarinet, and this I note here is actually only introduced by the flute. But you see the flute is introducing a higher octave, so giving a lot more brightness suddenly into this. So that's where I'm starting to expand, and the role of this third version is setting the resonance. So the idea of the resonance is, like I said a little bit earlier, you have these main line, and you eventually add other instruments from the orchestra that can prolong the note, that can give it a longer life than you would with only one instrument passing by. So the thing is, with the flute or the violin, you don't have the same kind of resonance that what you have on the harp or on the piano. The note dies out, right? And so you need other instruments to carry the sound a little bit more. I'm not saying always, but that's the orchestral style of adding orchestral resonance and giving orchestral resonance to one of your pieces. So I show you my main lines, which are mostly in the woodwinds. My horn is also getting on this. It's doing some of the notes. Actually, the same note from the bass clarinet here, but at a different speed, right? This is doing E, G sharp, and C. This one is already hitting the G sharp here. That is also presented by the bassoon, but see that the horn is holding this note from the bassoon as the bassoon is moving up. So that's a perfect example of orchestral resonance. And what's interesting to this is that you see here I have my bass clarinet who's holding a little bit longer the note from the bassoon. So the first note it's holding it for a quarter note instead of a 8 note. And when I hit the E here, we got the G sharp on the horn, like we said, and then the bass clarinet is joining here. So they're kind of all moving into the same direction, but at different pace. And this is where we touch a little bit onto heterophony, and that's maybe my style of orchestration most of the time. The style of orchestrating really brings all of these lines together and make them feel like they're all part of one big thing. And we do diverge a little bit from traditional counterpoint when we write like this. We do have to think about it and the counterpoint rules, but the fact that all of these lines are intertwined, this is what makes this very blurry and resonant and gestural kind of writing that I think is very, very useful to know about. So you see that all of these lines are intertwined. What can we say? What can we say also? We can also talk about the tuba, who's holding the low A sharp, who's holding the low A, and it's actually introducing a new register, an octave lower than that's the original note that was beginning. So we're giving this low A. And I'm orchestrating this with it's actually the resonance from the double bass, which is actually doing a pizzicato. So again, orchestral resonance and creating gestures that are short and others that prolongs it. And in that case, adding in some lower register. But this is really the spirit of that. And introducing things at different speeds as well, like the cello here. We have da-dee. We have these lines, which is actually a little bit quicker than what we had at first. We only had 8 notes in the original, and now I'm introducing 16 notes. But these 16 notes are really there to kind of blur the sound, and it's interesting that you have the punctuation and something that's animating and eventually prolonging the notes. That's a very powerful effect, I believe, when approaching the orchestra. Now I'm even adding a third element to this resonance, which is the attack first, the kind of disturbance of this attack, what is produces the sound in the air, it creates vibration, and then eventually holding the note because the vibration or the impact has stopped, and our attention is now fading away from that, but there's still kind of a presence. And so I'm doing this for the whole arpeggio going up here, and I wanted to use my strings for this. I like to free up my strings in that kind of writing. So as you see, I add my strings at first. So I send everything here because the strings are can be flexible. We can do the opposite, of course. The woodwinds, the winds can do the resonance and can do these kind of moving parts. It's actually could be fine. But for this particularly, I just wanted to show you with the strings how it's cool because you have this more mass kind of sound, massive sound. It's a very dense sound and a very blurry sound that you have within the orchestra because there's so many players compared to the woodwinds, which are usually few numbered. So this 16 notes movement is there, but see that I don't really use more than one section onto them. Maybe only here they're playing 16 notes for this, but otherwise, let's see here, they're all doing a different rhythm. Only the end here for the triplet, but otherwise, see here, that's very very dense in terms of rhythmic and very blurry. We really feel, usually when we hear that, you really feel it like a resonance, right? Something you kind of blur the sound and kind of contribute to a bigger, wider gestural movement. And I really like the strings for creating resonance because they're so big, like I said, they're so huge. So it feels like, even though they're on the front of the orchestra, it feels like they're giving kind of a natural reverb to the sound. So that's amazing to think about and to see. Only with these instruments, only with orchestration, you can create something that we were trying to produce, like in mixing or something like that. And I reintroduced the harp here just to have the original movement and the original attacks from what I had before, creating even more punctuations on the attacks, and allowing myself to create a sound that is molded onto this kind of multidimensional area. See that I also introduce higher notes now. Now, before we listen, let's just see that I do introduce higher lines suddenly. I wanted to start make the music feel a little bit bigger in terms of register. So that's what I'm doing with the low register. I'm adding the low A, an octave below what was usually there. And here, only for the last note, introducing the high violins, and also joined by, they're actually joining the flutes, which already introduced the IE. And the IE here is really kind of a resonance to the oboe. See that I'm not introducing any of the notes that I have here. It's really only, there's nothing in between this note and this IE anywhere. So it's really like you're pressing the button on the organ saying octava. It's just a different timbre. It's not a different harmony or different, a different line. It's really a color thing. And this E octave is resolving onto the G sharp and B, which is an octave higher than the oboe. So again, the flute here is only coloring the oboe. So it's not really like we feel like something is just going up and ending really high. We do feel like that da 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 dee da da. It's just at the end there's a little bit more brightness to the sound, and this is something to think about. And you don't always have to stick to exactly what you've written before. You need to understand it. Understand that this line is going up and down, pa pam, and then resolving onto these last two chords. And it's not doing something like this, right? It's not like da 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 dee da da. It's not ending on these high notes. But what I'm doing here is only color, adding some brightness at the end while still feeling the cadential ending. Now let's listen to this third version. Pretty cool, huh? So we already have something super satisfying, and that's really, explaining very well what is resonance. So I like to take things one step further all the time. I'm just did a fourth version while adding stuff. So this one is taking what I add here, but started to introduce these a little bit quicker and shorter elements. So on the strings, what you see here, these tremolos are only there for the downbeats and the upbeats as well here, and they're mostly following this the notes that are introduced by the harp. So a little bit wider, I would say. And that's something you think about when you orchestrate. Like, you have this gesture going up and it starts really low. It starts really low for like the string orchestra. You don't necessarily want to have just this low note played by the cello and the double bass. It might seem like a little bit imbalanced when you get into the second beat and now, oh wow, everybody can play this. Everybody from the string orchestra can play these notes. So suddenly you add in tons of strings, right? So I wanted to have something more like, I start with like the 3/5 of my strings, and now here I have a 4/5 of my string, and here I'm a fifth of my string. mostly because they're kind of exchanging, and it's only at this beat here, the second half of the third beat that I have mostly everybody. But yeah, doing something that is more balanced can help make the music tie up together. It's like you're doing a phrase. If you're doing a phrase that is too much of a crescendo, going to like volume 1 or density, I would say density because it's not the term of volume, density like 1 to density 10 at the end of the phrase, and the phrase is like what, 5 seconds. Well, this might feel like too much of a disbalance, I would say. So in that case, adding the trill, which is adding the A an octave higher here, even the G sharp an octave higher, I'm following this kind of a gesture that I'm introducing. This E again an octave higher, and then this one and the higher. You see the pattern. I'm only following this, and only here I'm not introducing an octave higher. Like I could have done something like that, but now I felt like, okay, now I'm high enough, so I have to break this rule at that point and have them come together onto these notes. But otherwise, this is mostly the same. It's just this part here, so a little bit more alive, a little bit more agility, and it's again resonance, but maybe a shorter resonance, but a more moving, I would say, resonance, adding a little bit more friction, a little bit more of a shimmering kind of sound. And that can also leave some space in these short silence to the other instruments from the orchestra. So we always tend to write too much when we orchestrate and when we just compose music. So leaving this little space, very, very small space, can help us just clean up a little bit this very crowded room that is the orchestra. Now the harp is doing the same thing. See that I added in just some little percussions, mostly punctuation. The vibraphone is just following more or less this line. And now my woodwinds are also doing kind of this moving part. I followed this, what I had from before, these notes that are going up and that are closer to the original piano version. But in between these notes, I added in some arpeggios, and even some embroidery. Here, I learned the word embroidery recently, and I want to keep using it all the time. I know broderie in French, but it's just I learned it in English, and now I'm so happy I can tell you about this. Was it an embroidery or just a passage note? I think this is just a passage note, actually. Oh, here, this one's a broderie and this one's a passage note. And these notes introduce some of the different sounds from this place. So adding a little bit of dissonance into this here with the B that's hitting here. And this one's an embroidery because it's going up from the main note from the chord and then back down. So yes, this one's introducing something new, this one as well, so it's creating a sixth. So introducing some dissonance actually from into sound. But notice that this dissonance is a new sixth. So the sixth is consonant in itself, but here the rest of the notes here, the E and the G sharp, are also consonant, but two consonants together creates this kind of dissonance, but it's a softer dissonance because it's two consonants. You follow? Okay, so let me stop rambling right now, and we can go back to these notes that I introduce higher arpeggios actually, and I took this opportunity to introduce the piccolo, which is contributing to this, creating an octave higher than this here. This is actually sounds an octave higher, and also a passage note here, the F sharp, that I thought was super interesting to add, and this is where we start to getting out more and more from just the harmonic side of what we had at first. It becomes more of a moving lines and more alive and more melodic in a way. So without further ado, let's listen to this final version of this orchestral resonance exercise. I'm always so amazed at how we could get something so simple into something so colorful and adding in so much complexity. But just a simple orchestral move, and this idea of orchestral resonance is really something that I've been pursuing for a long time, and I hope you can enjoy it as well in your own work. Now, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.